Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of FEHology, the study of Fire Emblem heroes. I'm Memento Mori, and for the first time, I'll be your FEHologist for today. So this episode will be the first part of a short series I'll be doing that aims to cover every single seasonal weapon that has come out in Fire Emblem heroes to this day. Because seasonal units are almost always a cause for celebration, be they alts of popular characters, or the introduction of long-awaited heroes who get stuck for 3 years without ever getting the original version in-game. But their inheritable weapons are also often very noteworthy, since they often provide more utility and act as a good alternative to the weapons in the normal pool, like the barrier weapons, the guard weapons, or the slaying weapons. Therefore, this episode hopes to provide a retrospective to allow you to see which weapons have stood the test of time and which were dead on arrival, allowing you to make the right choice of equipment for your units. But why is this that important? Because many of FEH's best free-to-play units do not have a preferred weapon, like Ninja Zehark, Christmas Hilda, Geese, the Flame Emperor, or Ninja Hannah. And the weapons that they come with can often be very lackluster. And for those wanting to max them out for the Colosseum modes, seasonal weapons are often the best option for the utility and combat power. And knowing which weapons are optimal for what archetypes and builds can allow you to spend your orbs wisely and target specific weapons in order to make your units even better. And so a brief overview of the structure. For every single banner, I'm going to talk about the general effect of the weapons, what weapon types with this effect are available and on what characters, give you a brief analysis of what the weapons do and how they can be useful, some build options for the weapons that are useful, I'll talk about the types of units or team compositions that can use them well, and finally I'll give you a brief rating, a rough numerical value in order to represent how much the weapons are recommended. Generally, I'd say weapons are worth considering if the score is 6 or over, but if you have a specific build in mind, don't let that stop you. But note that this retrospective is purely based upon the merit of the weapons. The units that the weapons came on do not matter. So 2017, which is the year I'm going to be focusing on in this episode, is of course the launch year of Fire Emblem Heroes, which also, unfortunately, means that many of these weapons are seriously outdated, and you probably aren't going to use them in most circumstances, which is why there probably isn't any purpose to discussing who they would be good on, but I'll provide you with some options anyway. In March of 2017, we had our very first seasonal banner in FE, the Spring Festival. The weapon effect is that if unit initiates attack, restores 4 HP after combat. And these weapons are pretty bad for 3 main reasons. Firstly, since they are only for player phase, the region does not give you any benefit in enemy phase. But secondly, they don't provide you with any support stats in combat or help you support your allies. And finally, because the regen happens after combat, it doesn't matter if the unit is dead because they wouldn't be able to take advantage of this effect anyway. And so I would rather view these weapons not for helping you get back some health after combat, but as a means of offsetting the recoil damage that some skills can bring, like the push skills or fury skills. If you look at the example of a push 4 skill, it does 5 recoil damage to a unit after combat. With these weapons, it only goes to a net 1 HP lost after each combat, which allows you to sustain the weapon's effects for much longer, which is what I would normally say. But however, with the Mystic Boost seal that came out on the recent Tempest trials, these weapons have become even more obsolete, because they don't regen as much health, they don't help you negate adaptive damage or Wrathful Staff, all of which are included in the single Mystic Boost seal, which is why these weapons are basically useless by now. And so, I'll give them a 2 out of 10. They're not exactly useless, there are some cases in which you can use them well, but they're pretty close to it. In May of 2017, we had the Bridal Blessings banner, and the weapon effect is that if unit initiates attack, grants the defense rest +2 to allies within 2 spaces for 1 turn after combat. This came as a bow on Cordelia, a blue tome on Shida, and a lance on Poor Charlotte, who has gone almost 4 years by now without ever getting her official version in-game. And these weapons are pretty interesting in that they are a conditional support skill, and after you enter combat you're able to grant boosts to your allies. But I think that the effect that the condition that they put upon you that you have to initiate attack kind of makes them very harsh. And also, since the buff that they grant is a visible buff of +2, it really isn't that spectacular, especially even when honed skills can probably do more than this. And if your unit has to enter combat in order to achieve the support effect, I also don't think it's extremely practical, since the support units which you would typically run these weapons on probably aren't that good in combat anyway, and there is no guarantee that they would survive. Which is why I give these weapons a 3 out of 10. They're interesting, but you're probably not going to use them anyway. But on this banner, what is interesting is that we also had an outlier, an inheritable weapon with an effect that is different from the other inheritable weapons on the banner. And that came as the Candlelight Plus staff on Lin. After combat, if unit attacked, inflicts status on target and foes within 2 spaces of target, preventing counterattacks through their next actions. And you've probably seen the effect of this staff before because it is quite common. There is the Flash Plus staff on Mikoto, and the effect negate that prevents counterattacks can also be seen on Kemp's Perf or Rajat's Refine. And so yeah, you probably know that these weapons are incredibly useful, especially in AR, where controlling an entire enemy team with this effect can be very useful. But however, one main problem of this weapon is that it suffers from availability. As I said before, Mikoto already has the Flash Plus staff, and Mikoto is in the normal pull, whereas Lin on the Bridal banner basically only gets rerun once per year. And because the Flash Plus staff is far more accessible, and Mikoto does appear as a focus unit on some banners for specific skills, you're probably going to want to go for that staff instead of this one. And so even though it has very good utility and an interesting effect, I think that the accessibility really hinders this weapon from being more prominent or being more useful, which is why I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. In June of 2017, we had our very first summer banner, the Elysian Summer. And the weapon effect is that at start of combat, if unit's HP is 100%, grants attack, speed, defense, res +2 during combat, but after combat deals 2 damage to unit. This came as a lance on Robin, an axe on the Daltiki, a bow on Gaius, and a dagger on Frederick. And these weapons are analogous to a full spectrum push free skill. They require you to be at full health, but after combat they do some recoil damage to take you out of the 100% threshold and therefore removing the effect. And the push free skills were bad for a reason, because often the cost of keeping a unit at 100% HP after every single combat often doesn't really justify the stat increase, especially when it is only a +2 during combat. Which is why I'm giving these weapons a 2 out of 10. There's simply too high an investment required for too little return in sustaining the effects of these weapons. In July of 2017, we got the Norian Summer banner, and I'm sure you're all extremely excited to listen about these effects. They grant attack speed +1 to allies within 2 spaces during combat. This effect came as an axe on Xander, a red tome on Leal, a blue tome on Corrin, and a green tome on Elise. And I'm not going to mince words here. These are known as some of the worst inheritable weapons in the game, and for very good reason. Because a +1 to attack and speed is not going to make a difference in 99% of situations. Of course, you could always stack them up with a drive skill in the C slot or the seal slot, but I think that the weapons themselves simply do not provide enough utility, and even if you used a completely different weapon that benefits the user and their allies more, even if you run the drive skill there, it would still not make that much of a difference. And so aside from the memes, you probably aren't going to run these weapons in any serious situation whatsoever, which is why I'm giving them a 1 out of 10 for the +1 boost that they give to each stat. In September of 2017, we got our very first performing arts banner, where every single hero on this banner was a dancer. And the weapon effect is that if unit initiates combat, restore 7 HP to adjacent allies after combat. This came as a dagger on Olivia, a blue tome on Inigo, and a green tome on Shigure. So these weapons are literally Breath of Life in a weapon, a skill that is basically never used unless you ask Jackal. Of course, they can have some niche uses as passive healing in order to support units with maybe push 4 skills, which require these skills in order to regain that HP, or the double lion skill before Celica's refine. But the adjacent requirement is very harsh, and the condition that you have to initiate combat in order to get that regen also probably doesn't bode well for these support units who would typically be running these weapons. Nonetheless, you could always just also run Breath of Life in the C slot, so that whenever you initiate combat, you are able to restore 14 HP to adjacent allies. And so I'll give these weapons a 3 out of 10. They can have their uses, but are also very niche and not recommended nonetheless. In October of 2017, we got the very first Halloween banner, Trick or Defeat. The weapon effect is that after combat, if unit attacked, converts bonuses and foes within 2 spaces of target into penalties through their next actions. This came as a bow on Jacob and a green tome on Henry. And yeah, these are panic weapons, which are always useful in a meta where visible buffs and debuffs can be very important for a team. But I don't think they are best suited for maybe the bow or the green tome slot. If you look at a green tome, maybe, because there really aren't that many competitive green tomes nowadays, and having a panic effect might be useful if you're going for a specific team composition. But when you look at bows, there are always far better options than a bow that just inflicts panic. When you look at Brave Bow, Fire Sweep Bow, or Spendthrift Bow, these are all bows that can vastly boost your combat potential and damage output. And so I think that when compared to those far more competitive options, these weapons will lose out, which is why I'll give them a 5 out of 10. The panic effect is always useful, but you probably have better and more competitive options that you can choose. And the outlier for this banner is the Kitty Paddle Plus on Sakura. The only effect that it has is that it is effective against magic foes. I'd say this weapon is quite similar to Kagero's Poison Dagger, in that they both have the potential to do some very useful effective damage, but they still have far too low might to be useful. And especially with the recent Binding Blade banner that came out, when you look at the Aureola Tome on Guinevere, aside from being effective against magic foes, it gives her stat boost in combat and also acts as healing to herself and passive healing to her allies. And when compared to that, pulling specifically for a Kitty Paddle on Sakura to put on a unit to counter other magic units is simply far too niche, which is why I'll give this a 4 out of 10, because better options definitely exist, and I'm not sure whether the niche of being effective against magic foes is really worth pulling for a weapon that has so little might and so little offensive power anyway. And in December of 2017, we got the Winter's Envoy banner. So the effect is that if foe initiates combat, grants attack, speed, defense, res +2 during combat. This came as a lance on Robin, an axe on Chrom and Lissa, and a red tome on Tarja. So yeah, this is basically a spectrum stance skill, which can be useful on defensive tanks. If you've been doing arena for a while, you might have seen a Flame Emperor or Echidna or two with Chrom's weapon, because it looks very silly. But however, I don't really think that the stat growth is enough to justify going for the weapons, because attack speed, defense, res +2 really isn't that significant of a boost. And if you're talking about the defensive tank, often they probably aren't going to make use of every single one of those 4 stats. And so if you compare that to some other weapons later down the line in maybe 2018 or 2019, which have similar conditions but allow you to specify in 2 stats in general, that would probably give you a better idea of what build to specifically use a unit in and allow them to excel better at that role, instead of a very general +2 to all stats. Which is why I'll give these weapons a 4 out of 10. They are decently useful for any defensive unit at all, but they might not be good enough to justify their use. And in December of 2017, we had the Happy New Year banner. For some reason, this New Year's banner began on December the 31st instead of January the 1st, as the other New Year's banners did, so I'm counting it here as well. And so the weapon effect is that they grant defense res +2 to allies within 2 spaces during combat. This came as a sword on Camilla, an axe on Azura, and a bow on Corrin. And so it is essentially a drive defense res 2, which still doesn't exist in the game for some reason. I still don't understand why IS has dual stat spur skills but not dual stat drive skills. And I'd say these are basically a better version of both the Bridal Blessings and Norian Summer weapons, because when compared to the Bridal Blessings weapons, which give a visible buff, and the Norian Summer weapons which give +1, these weapons, you can stack these weapons with other drive skills, and that can allow you to actually achieve better effects than if they were the Norian Summer weapons and granted attack speed +1. Which is why I'll give these a 5 out of 10. They are quite useful for any support unit in general, and stacking them with drive skills can allow you to support your allies very well. So I hope this episode was useful and you all enjoy listening to it. And in the near future, I'm probably going to record 3 more episodes in this series, one for each year of 2018, 2019, and 2020. And so that will be about it for now. If you'd like to reach out to the show, you can do so through a subreddit at r/FEHology, or just join the R&D Discord server where there is far more activity anyway. And you can also email the show directly at fehology@gmail.com. If you would like to direct message any of us, you can see the other FEHologists' Discord tags in the show notes, and you can also send us your voice messages through Anchor if you ever feel inclined to do so. I hope you have a wonderful day and schedule another appointment with your FEHologist real soon.